Hello, good evening, listeners. Welcome to BFM 91.2. My name is Yara Esba, and today we're starting a new program called the Legal Hour on BFM 91.2. So, welcome to the Legal Hour. It's basically the first edition for this particular program, and I welcome all the listeners as we go about learning our Constitution, especially the draft Constitution that was just voted against by our parliamentarians recently. So this evening I have a guest who is Mandiing Sane, is a law graduate from the University of the Gambia, and also on the list of the guests is basically Mamadou Seydou Balde, who is yet to be in. He is also a law graduate from the University of the Gambia. So we'll be discussing certain issues concerning. Since this is the first edition of the program, we would look at the basic or the general context of a constitution in a democratic state. So today we would look at the meaning of a constitution in a democratic society, the importance of a constitution in democracy, and the second segment would be on the trust bin draft constitution. I call it a trust bin. Basically, I don't know whether the listeners outside would agree with me. So we have another segment on this show that is going to be looking at the communique that was made by the Western nations on the draft constitution, where they urge our parliamentarians to basically vote in the new draft constitution. So we would look at some of these points and dilate more on it. My name is Yara Esba, and as I said, Mandiing Sane, a law graduate from the University of the Gambia, is one of our guests, and Mamadou Seydou Balde, who is also a law graduate from the University of the Gambia. These are the two experienced guests that we have today. So before we go, I would just allow Mr. Sane to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about his background first before we get into the main context of the program.
Hello, wonderful listeners. My name is Mandiing Sane. I am a law graduate from University of the Gambia, class of 2022. As Mr. Bah rightly said, I am actually not an expert, though. Yeah, I am just a learner in the domain of law. I am currently making research as far as law is concerned, so I am not an expert, and anything that is shared here is just my opinion and also my reasoning as far as the law is concerned. So I am happy to be here today, and I am hopeful that we'll have a very wonderful discussion.
Thank you very much. You've heard that's Mr. Mandiing Sane, a law graduate from the University of the Gambia. As he pointed out, that he is also just a law researcher. So the first point basically is let us look at the meaning of a constitution. When we talk about constitution, what sort of document are we talking about here?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ba. I think it's very important for us to start with this. What is a constitution? In the layman parlance, that is, laymen will define a constitution as a document that governs the conduct of a certain group or a certain kind of people or a nation or a state. But when it comes to the legal definition of a constitution, it is beyond that. If you look at the constitution, actually the definition would mean that a constitution is a document that is fundamentally prepared by people of a particular state or a nation or an organization, and this document establishes the government, the institution of the government, the apparatus of the particular government, and also laid down maybe the functions of those kind of institutions in the state. So a constitution also will go beyond to guarantee fundamental human rights and freedom. So this is basically a constitution.
All right, quite vivid, basically. So this goes to show how important a document called the Constitution is when it comes to governing society, how society lives, and how they do business and all kinds of things. So is a constitution basically any document? For instance, is it any document basically, a constitution?
No, actually, a constitution cannot be any document. It has to be a legal document. It has to be a document that is prepared by the people. That's why there is this legal scholar called Thomas Paine, who says that a constitution is not the creation of the government, but it is the creation of the people constituting the government. So a constitution is not just a document, it is a document that is created by the people that constitute the government. So actually, constitution can never be any document. That's why it's a sacred book. That's why it's beyond, and that's why it is the ultimate law that governs the relationship of people, and also spell out the rules of the government, and also establish institutions that are actually there to actually establish certain procedures, and those procedures also have to be in line with the constitution. So the constitution can never be any document.
So it cannot be any document that we can call a constitution, especially a national constitution. You painted a particular point which is really important, and that is, it is not a document that is made by the government, but by the people who constitute the government. So right now, how would you link that point to our current situation with regards to the draft constitution that was just voted against by our parliamentarians?
Can you please come again?
Yes, so you were saying like the constitution is not any document. You know, it's a document that is made by the people who constitute the government. So looking at our context at the moment as a country, where we are going when it comes to the legal battles, how could you link that point to the current situation of the Gambia, where we have our parliamentarians voted against a draft constitution which was highly consultative when during its formation?
Yes, actually this has been my argument. If you've been following me on my Facebook post, I've always been saying this, and I think I also have to say it here as well. The parliament do not have any right to vote out. I think this should be coming. I was expecting this to come in our subsequent discussions.
Sure.
I can still say it right now, that the parliament do not have any right whatsoever to tamper with the constitution. And there is this argument made by a lawyer and a politician, my party, which I also support, which I think was my original position with respect to this subject matter, was that there is no provision in the 1997 Constitution that says that the Parliament it actually does not even provide any provision for the repulsion or the repeal of the 1997 Constitution. So actually, yes. So people that rely on the repeal, the procedures that need to be followed for the Constitution, the 1997 Constitution to be repealed, were actually using the provision of Section 226, which is actually, I would say, misconstrued. My party further went to say, which I also support, that the Constitution, that is the 1997 Constitution, actually did not foresee the repulsion. That means it actually did not have this provision that would say, now if, for example, there is a certain stage in the life of these people that they don't need this constitution, what are the procedures that needs to be followed for this particular constitution to be repealed? There is no provision basically that says what are the procedures that needs to be followed. So they actually followed a provision that I would say is misconstrued.
So, in a sense, like the 1997 Constitution, you're trying to say it was blind.
Absolutely.
When it comes to the repulsion of it. For instance, if there comes a time we Gambians no longer need the 1997 Constitution, how to do away with it? It wasn't captured in that 1997 Constitution.
Yes, that is basically my argument.
Okay, so our next guest is actually in the studio, and that is Mamadou Seydou Balde, who is a law graduate from the University of the Gambia. I would allow him to introduce himself, and then we pick up from there. Mr. Balde, welcome to the show, The Legal Hour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ba, and I apologize for coming late. Actually, it's because of I did not get the direction initially.
Okay.
So I apologize for that.
Understood.
I am Mamadou Saidouba. I'm currently working at the judiciary of the Gambia. I did law at the University of the Gambia and subsequently to the Gambia Law School.
Okay.
And thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Yes, listeners, that is Mamadou Saidouba instead of Saidoubalé. I beg your pardon. So, Mamadou Saidou, let us get this point here. For instance, could the Constitution satisfy every person in every aspect? For instance, in the drafting of a Constitution, can it satisfy the feelings or the aspirations of every person in all things?
And thank you very much, Mr. Ba. It is impossible for the draft constitution to satisfy each and every Gambian, but then it is very important for the draft constitution to satisfy majority of Gambians. The yearning and aspirations of majority of Gambians should be reflected in the draft constitution. If it is not reflected there, there is a probability that it will be rejected at referendum had it made it to that level.
Okay.
So it is unfortunate that it did not make it to that level.
Yeah, so Sani, so it means basically a constitution cannot satisfy the aspirations of every citizen. But sometimes, does this mean we have to make some compromises here and there as citizens in order to get a constitution?
No, actually, as Mr. Bass says, actually the Constitution can never satisfy everybody. I actually made this argument and someone came up and I was actually referring to a particular law that was discriminatory, and someone just got up and told me that there is no law that is not discriminatory. Every law is discriminatory in the sense that what satisfies you will not satisfy me. But the law, there is a general understanding that law can be discriminatory provided that that particular law is positive. That particular discriminatory maybe description of that particular law is positive, we can accept that, but the negative discrimination we will not accept that. So for the fact that the Constitution is actually a document that does not satisfy everybody doesn't mean that we will not actually adopt it as our own. So that's why there is a threshold that the Constitution will provide. For example, when it goes to referendum, like in the 1997 Constitution, it says that if the Constitution goes to referendum, at least 50% of the voters must vote. And out of that 50% of the total number of voters in the Gambia, 75% of them must favor the Constitution. So it does not say 100% because there is a general understanding that not everybody would actually support a particular Constitution.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So, Mr. Bande, let me take you back just a little bit because why is the Constitution as a document so important? Why is it so important, example? Why is it so special as a document?
Thank you, Mr. Ba. The Constitution is the ground norm, is the supreme law of the land. So that is why it is so important for the country, because all other laws derive their source from the Constitution. So, and it also lays foundation for good governance, respect for fundamental rights, and all other things. So the Constitution is so important that you cannot be able to determine how important it is. It is so important that you may not be able to measure its importance.
Okay.
So that's why you hear all this noise that this provision of the Constitution did not favor X, Y, and Z, because we know that if it passes through referendum, that's the end of it. Even if you are at a disadvantage, you may not be able to argue that before a court of law because it's conspicuously written in the Constitution that it is X, Y, and Z. So there is nothing that you can do. Thank you.
Yeah. So listeners, you're listening to BFM 91.2. My name is Yara Esba, and you're listening to the Legal Hour. This is the first edition that has been launched from this new radio station and a new program. So yes, Mr. Sani, why is it there is a huge debate that is surrounding the new constitution or the new draft constitution? Why was it basically failed at the National Assembly? If so many Gambians are basically agreeing that it was a good document, why does it fail at the National Assembly and it did not get to a referendum?
Yeah, I would say that answer is straightforward. There is a legal provision with the constitution, I would say the draft or the promulgation bill of the 2020 draft constitution did not actually meet, which is the threshold. There is a provision with respect to the procedures that has to be followed or have to be followed for the constitution to be actually adopted. So these procedures were not actually fulfilled. If you look at the 1997 constitution, in order for a bill to actually be maybe enacted as a law and assented to by the president, it has to pass certain procedures, one of which is, for example, especially for constitution, it has to be published in the Gazette, public Gazette, twice. And the first one, the duration or the period between the first and the second has to be 3 months. And then after that, the second, before the second, after the second publication in the Gazette, it has to also, it should not be introduced in the parliament 10 months earlier. So you realize that these are the procedures, and after that as well, the parliament also has to debate. They should have the first reading, the second reading, and then and so on and so forth. So the current constitution, or you describe as the trust bin constitution, actually failed because it failed to actually meet the threshold, which was 3/3 of the total members of the 1990 the National Assembly members. They have to actually support the draft. So actually they failed with respect to the number of people that supported it and the number of people that actually went against it. So that's why actually it failed.
Yes, so Mamadou, can you elaborate, for instance, on that point, if you have a different view or perspective to Mr. Sane, for instance?
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure whether I have a different answer to that, because the draft constitution fails since the first day it was published. Since the first day it was published by the Constitutional Review Commission, there was a lot of commotion as to why the CRC did not include X, Y, and Z provisions. There was a commotion in the country since the beginning. So they were having a chance to put maybe those concern of people who can actually frustrate the entire process of the CRC. They fail to incorporate those people's recommendations. Had it been those recommendations were made, for instance, there are certain people who are so influential that they can frustrate an entire process of a country. So I think in drafting a constitution, it is important to also consider those kind of things, even though they are petty, but then you will not like certain elements of the society to frustrate an entire process where you have devoted your time, energy, and resources and everything. At the end of the day, there is nothing that can be done about that. The process was absolutely a difficult one, but then it actually failed. The CRC, the draft constitution failed since the first day it was published by the CRC.
All right, listeners, later in the next or in the last 30 minutes, we'll basically open the lines for listeners to call in and make some comments or suggestions to the show, since this is the first edition. But before we get to that, I would come back to Mr. Sane to basically try and answer this question for us. Are there any threats that this constitution, for instance, a constitution, can pose to a nation or her people. For instance, what I mean here is, since the Constitution governs our lives, and whatever we do is within the law, can the Constitution be a threat to someone, example, to a citizen, for instance?
I'm not sure I understand this question. I'm not sure what you actually want me to.
Yes, so, okay, let me get back to the point. You did say here that the Constitution governs everything, because it actually dictates lives for us, what we should do, how we should do it, and where should we do it. For instance, in that case, when we have like certain law in a constitution, or certain chapter or a certain sentence in the Constitution, can those can they harm like the citizenry, for instance, in that regard? If it is, I don't know how to explain this point, but for instance, can a constitution of a nation hurt the people or harm the general interest of the populace? Like, for instance, the 1997 constitution is believed to be changed more than 50 times or 50 times. Probably you guys stand a better chance to verify that for us. Those areas that were amended in the 1997 constitution basically were trying to empower an individual or a particular interest group. Can those change, example, those laws, can they harm the majority of the citizenry, for instance?
Yeah, absolutely. Laws that are actually encapsulated in the Constitution, they are the determinant factor to actually cause any good or harm in our lives as citizens of a particular state. So if a particular provision of the Constitution states this, there is no law, there is no judge, there is no authority that can go against those kind of provisions. So as soon as a particular law or a particular provision is captured in the Constitution, it means that everyone is bound by that particular provision, regardless of whether you support the provision or not. So I know amendments, over 50 amendments were made to the 1997 Constitution. Some of them were actually illegally made, as alleged by a good number of people, because there were clauses that we refer to as entrenched clauses, and these entrenched clauses mean they can never be changed, or they are not subject to change like any other clause. They have to pass through certain procedures, one of which is they have to even go through referendum, so that people can say whether they want that particular provision to change or not. So some of the provisions in the Constitution were changed without following due procedure of the law, which were illegally made. So that being said, a constitution, your question is whether laws that are encapsulated in the Constitution can hurt or can harm a citizen. Of course they can, because they are the one that dictates your life. If law A, B, and C says you have to be killed if you are maybe found guilty by a court of law, then you have to be killed, because it is actually law that is stated in the Constitution. So actually, Constitution will dictate your life, so it can hurt you if, for example, it is not in your best interest.
BFM 91.2. This is the legal hour. So before we open the lines, basically it will be in the next 30 minutes. Today, as the first edition, we're just trying to look at some of the basic importance of the Constitution of a democratic state. And before, in our subsequent programs, we will try to basically strike a deal on specific issues on the Constitution, or on the draft Constitution, basically. But for today, we are generalizing things to look at the fundamental importance of a constitution in a society. Mr. Ba, let us look at this point here. African leaders usually use the document or the constitution to entrench themselves in power. For instance, why do you think this is the case, for instance?
Please repeat the question.
Yes, I mean, for instance, we have seen like some African leaders, or most African leaders, would basically use the constitution itself to maybe amend it in a certain way that will empower them or entrench them in power. Why do you think this is the case, for instance, on the African continent?
Okay, thank you very much. This is something that you see or hear in Africa every time. Even recently in Guinea Conakry, and in the Ivory Coast, it happened there. The sitting presidents want to serve third terms, and as a result, they soak their Supreme Court jurisdictions in order to amend their constitutions so that they can be able to contest third term in office. This is one of the problems we have in Africa, because leaders always want to ignore provisions of their constitution or amend it to their advantage. All these things is dictated by hunger for power, and also wanting to sway the aspirations of the people in power, or the people who are putting them in power. Because if a constitution says you can only serve 2 terms in office, you want to extend it, you want to serve, for instance, a third term, it's always bring chaos in Africa, and it's because of hunger for power. That's why we always see this in Africa.
Right. Yeah, Mr. Sane, what's your take on this particular area? Like so many leaders, as I said, would basically use the constitution, which is most of the times is really a good document, but would try one way or another to change the document or amend certain places to entrench themselves in power. For instance, the Gambians are a better example, for instance, where the constitution, 1997 constitution, was changed basically 50 times or more to empower one individual. Why do you think that's the case for Africa, for instance? What is actually the problem? It doesn't mean like our legal documents were not properly architected to prevent this kind of people from taking the power of the individuals or the people in their respective countries.
Basically, I would say yes, that is the case. Actually, our constitutions, most of our constitutions do not entrench certain clauses, and then even if they entrench, like I made mention of previously, even if certain provisions entrench, actually the president is the head of the state, and also yes, he is the head of the state and commander-in-chief of the armed forces in most of the countries. So you realize that he can do anything he wishes, regardless of whether that particular thing that he's actually doing is in line with the law or not. So I would basically say, like, I would agree with Mr. Ba that most African sitting presidents would change the constitution to suit their own political ambition, because of the fact that they want to stay in power.
But they are not alone. For instance, Jammeh wasn't alone who tried to manipulate the constitution to his favor. For instance, we have other citizens who are behind them and helping them, for instance, to change those things, especially at the parliament.
Yes, of course. The parliament has to be subjected to the control of the executive if this has to happen. That's why there is a wide principle that says that no constitution is democratic if it does not have these 4 features. Yes, and these 4 features is that the first feature is about parliament. Once a parliament is convened, it can never be dismissed by anybody except itself. And then the other one is about the executive. The executive cannot appoint ministers without the approval of the parliament. And judges once appointed should not also be subject to control by any other authority. And then the final one, which is the 4th one, is about lawmaking. The power to make laws are the prerogative or only the function of the the parliament, that is the National Assembly, and no other body except the parliament should be allowed to make laws. So these are the four principles, cardinal principles, that would justify the democratic nature of a particular constitution or not. So if these things failed, actually that particular constitution is actually unconstitutional or undemocratic constitution. Yes.
Yeah, but for instance, you would see that certain constitutions may have like the entering clause that you said, for instance, where it needs a referendum before it can be changed. But in our own case, for instance, our parliament, the previous parliament, did, make some laws in favor of a particular group or a particular individual that were basically needed a referendum, for instance. Why do you think the executive always has the power over the legislative, for instance, in most African countries to basically dribble them around?
Now, actually, I think deploy or some of the mechanisms that they use, that the sitting president use, is to have control of certain members of the executive and
the parliament.
Parliament. I beg your pardon.
Yes.
So you realize that if the president, that's why there is this, I think, familiar quotation or maybe familiar notion that the president should not be given the power to appoint or to nominate any member of the parliament. So the parliament every member of the parliament should actually be elected to go into parliament, so that the president would not actually control anybody in the parliament. Because we've seen like the case, for example, in the case of the National Assembly against its own member, that is Yakumba. Yes, Yakumba actually was a nominated member from by the president. But later on, we heard that she was removed from her position. With respect to that, whether the president has power to do that or not, and then it was in the negative that the president do not have such powers to nominate someone and later on remove the president. So actually, if the president can ever do this, can ever change any entrance clause, it has to have the power over the people that actually make those laws, which are the National Assembly members, that are the parliament, as we really call them. So actually, this is the mechanism that they actually use.
Okay. Yeah. So listeners, this is BFM 91.2. This is the legal hour with me, Yara Esba, and my guest is Mr. Nayuki Sane, law graduate from the University of the Gambia, and Mamadou Seiduba, also a graduate from the University of the Gambia. We are basically having a general discussion on the meaning of a constitution and the importance of it in a democratic society. So if you have any comment that you want to make, you can call us on 784-1456, 784-1456, 784-1456, or 329-6069, 329-6069. To make your comments, you can call these numbers or send us a text message probably, and we would read it right here. Or if you want to send a text message, basically you can send it to 32321, 2232321. If you want to make a call 784-1456, 784-1456, or 329-6069. Mr. Ba, let us look at this place. Why do we have to change constitutions whenever a new government comes into play?
Thank you. One of the reasons why we change constitutions is to make room for a better law, because most of the time people will see that there is this particular law in the constitution that need to be changed so that they can cater for the yearning and aspirations of majority of people who elected the new government in power. For instance, in the 1997 constitution, when this new government came, there were certain provisions that they change in order to cater for what majority of Gambians needed. Like there was this provision in the 1997 constitutions which provides that if a National Assembly member is sacked by the party that elected them, they automatically lose their seats in parliament, which was to me a bad law because National Assembly members, they are there to serve the interests of the party instead of the interests of the people that they are representing, regardless of whether they vote for them during the time of elections or not. But then they are there to represent their interests. So if a political party should have the power, or the leader, most of the time is the leader of the political party who will initiate this, that they will actually sack you and you eventually lose your seat in parliament, which was a very unfortunate provision, and the first thing that they did is for them to remove it. And then there is this also provision in the Local Government Act, as you might know, which says that if a local government councillor or a chairman is removed or is sacked by their political party, they automatically lose their seat, and eventually that was eventually changed. So these are the kind of provisions that a new government will always look forward to changing in order to provide for a room for a progressive society, because you cannot be serving a government and you are always scared of being sacked by a political party, even though you are doing actually great for the people that you are representing.
Yeah. All right. So, Mr. Sane, let us look at these. For instance, when Jawara came, 1965, 1970, he came up with a constitution for the Gambia. Later, Jammeh came in 1994, 1997, he came up with a new constitution. Now, Barrow came in, he wanted to come with a new constitution, which is the 2020. Does this mean every generation or every government that comes into power really need to change the laws of the land?
No, not actually. Governments actually, I think it depends on what kind of constitution you made. For the case of Jammeh, who actually came into power by overthrowing legitimate government, also there is this principle in law that if you overthrow a government, you overthrow the constitution. Yes, so if you actually come into power through the barrel of the gun, it means that you cannot retain the particular constitution that you actually violated, because any genuine constitution has a provision that would actually make it a law that nobody can actually claim to power, can be president of a particular state without being voted into that particular position by the people. So if you violate a particular provision of the constitution, then your government will be recognized by that particular constitution as an illegitimate government. So the first thing that you have to do is to throw that constitution and prepare your own constitution. So for that of Jammeh, it's a special case. But when it comes to the Third Republic, which is the government of Barrow, there was this strong argument made by Halifa Saleh, who said that the constitution need not to actually be repealed in total. He is actually advocating for the constitution to be just amended. Provisions that we need, let us just retain the provisions that we do not need. Let us just try and remove them by repealing them and bring another constitution, or amending them and bring new provisions that will suit our interests and our aspiration as citizens of the country. And I think this is a very, very strong argument. But I don't know why the new government actually want to come up with a constitution. Maybe it's because of their conviction that actually the constitution will not serve their best interest, or because maybe the previous government would actually thrive or would actually have some upper hand when it comes to certain legal procedures that they want to actually maybe institute against the previous government. If you could remember, there was this call for the prosecution of the former government. There was this call for the prosecution of those that aided and abetted the former government. So all these things could not be possible using the 1997 constitution, because Jammeh, I don't know how he changed this provision, how he maneuvered to get legal minds to change provisions to suit his interests even after him. I think he has actually foreseen what will happen, the consequence of what actually will happen after his government. So he has these provisions in the constitution that will even protect him after he leaves power. Okay. So that's why I think that is one of the reasons why the current government actually wants to have a new constitution that would just repeal, that would just throw the other constitution, that is the 1997 constitution that is widely called the Jammeh's constitution,
but
and have a new one.
Yes, but is it possible, Mr. Barr, for instance, was it really a genuine argument to make, for instance, to say there is no need to overhaul the whole 1997 constitution, like Khalifa suggested, that we can just move in and amend some of the provisions, as Mr. Sane said? Was it a viable argument for that?
Thank you, Mr. Barr. I think that is a valid agreement. It's a valid argument that we did not need a new constitution. We just needed to amend the 1997 constitution, because until today we have some fine provisions that even should be included.
You mean the 1997?
In the 1997 constitution, we still have some fine provisions that I think even the draft constitution must have captured. Yes, there are certain provisions in the 1997 constitution that should have been amended to make it perfect, like providing for majority rule, providing for term limit. There are some things like that. We could have not have wasted this huge amount of money, and at the end of the day we did not see, or we did not achieve what we wanted to achieve.
Okay. Yeah, actually, I think I also sound the same opinion, or a similar opinion with respect to that. Because if you read the draft constitution and read the 1997 constitution, I think they are very similar when it comes to provisions that we all want to see in the constitution. They are very similar. Yes, when it comes to citizenship, I think the only thing that is removed from the 1997 constitution is citizenship by descent. Now everything, even if your descendants are Gambians, you can acquire citizenship by birth. So these are some of the things that are just removed from citizenship. The whole of that chapter, I think chapter 4 or chapter 5 of the 1997 constitution. So you realize that there was nothing that was changed from the 1997. I must admit that yes, there were certain provisions that were introduced in the 2020 draft which were absent in the 1997 constitution. Yes, I admit that. But I think all this could have been possible through amendments, like my senior counsel just rightly said.
So it was a route or an easier path to success.
Exactly.
Yes, I think so, but also looking at some of the problems that it might pose, you can also argue that there are some clauses that are entrenched, and if you are to change those clauses, it has to go through referendum, and then we are trying to avoid referendum here, and then we will also encounter referendum when we want to make some certain amendments. So I think that is some of the problems you might also face when you want to just make amendments instead of repealing the whole constitution.
Okay. Well, listeners, this is the Legal Hour. My name is Yara S. Ba. You're listening to BFM 91.2. Manju Kisane and Mohamed Saidu Ba are our guests today. So both university graduates, law graduates from the University of the Gambia. If you want to call, you can dial 784-1456, 784-1456 or 329-6069. if you want to call or make any comments, you are highly welcome to the Legal Hour on BFM 91.2. So let us move to this. For instance, how devastating or destabilizing is the changing of constitutions from one government to another when it comes to legal issues on the African continent, particularly on the Gambia, because we have since 1965 we are trying to get at least 3 constitutions. How destabilizing is it? Because right now there is this reverberation that is going in society about this draft constitution. We spend so much money, $160 million is, all the energy that was spent along the process. How destabilizing is it for citizens, for instance?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ba. I think it is very destabilizing, especially changing or trying to change the 1997 constitution to the 2020 draft constitution. There is this frustration going on in the minds of most Gambians who think that the draft constitution should have made its way to the referendum. People are actually frustrated with the entire process, having wasted so much time and energy and resources in order to draft a constitution. But then building a constitution is not an easy thing to do. You will start it and you might end up falling down. You might not be able to actualize what you want to achieve. That's what happened in the Gambia, and it's very frustrating that what we yearn for, like term limit, this is something that many Gambians wants to see in our constitution. We are frustrated of seeing people leading us for 20 years, same person leading us for 20 years, 30 years. And it's, even with our current generation, it is very possible for someone to continue leading us if our constitution did not provide for term limit. And if that happens, our democracy and even good governance can be retarded, because people have different ways of tackling issues. There are some who can tackle issues more progressively than others. And if that happens, if for instance someone who is not progressive happens to be leading us, we will not have something that will actually take us forward, that will provide for developments, good governance and stuff like that. But then with frequent changes, like every 10 years or every 5 years, anybody who comes will want to do something that the former government did not do. And if you know that you are to serve for only 10 years at most, or at least 5 years, if for instance you want to seek a second term, if you are serving for 5 years and you want to go for 10 years, you will actually want to do things that will make you win a second term. If you are not doing development oriented activities, the people might kick you out at the end of the day. So building a constitution, it's very frustrating, and I think we should not be tired of, if we cannot amend the constitution to provide for the aspirations of Gambians, we should not be tired of actually campaigning to get a new constitution, a progressive one. The draft constitution, actually, I don't know whether you read there, it's a very progressive one, subject to some amendments or removal of certain provisions which are actually there to protect the interests of some very few people in the country. It's a very fine one, the draft, it was a very fine one, but then there are certain provisions that could have been removed from it.
We'll get to that. Inshallah.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Ba. We're just some few minutes away from the commercial break. So we're listening to the Legal Hour with me, Yara S. Ba, and Majika Sani, and Mohamed Seydu Ba, our legal guests here. They are both law graduates from the University of the Gambia. So before the break, I'll just announce some of the numbers that you can call in to make your contributions. 7841456 or 3296069. I think it's time for the commercial break. We will go for the commercial break and get back very soon. Thank you very much.